1974, and I'm interviewing Rabbi Mars Kertzer, and we are in New York City, New York. First of all, I wanted a little background material, if I might, on when you got to Europe, what year, and when you first encountered DPs.
In other words, you don't want the background of my arriving in North Africa particularly.
Yeah.
I'll just tell you in a sentence.
Okay.
So I arrived on March 4th, 1944, in the European theater, actually, in Algiers, and then I came to Naples and, on the Anzio beachhead. The first Jews I met were in the Palestine Brigade. The Palestine Brigade were people who alerted me first to the fact that the Jews of Palestine were interested in finding the remnants of European Jewry. Then I really understood that they were they were much more sensitive and alert to the problems than American Jews were. That was in Naples and on their way to Rome. They were the Palestinians. The Palestine, it was called the Jewish Brigade or whatever.
Yeah, the brigade, right.
The brigade, and they hunted up Jews everywhere, even in Italy, well, of which there weren't too many. And then when I came to France, to Marseille on Rosh Hashanah 1944. We landed just 3 weeks before, and I was called to serve the men who had landed. And Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur intervened in September, and then when I returned, the Palestine Brigade invited me to speak. I didn't know in Hebrew, but finally they did. You know Hebrew,
yes,
sure. My Hebrew wasn't that good. I started up with describing how the French underground had operated, and I didn't know the word. I called them tachtonim, which they thought was very funny. And then I spoke about what I found in France, you see, in terms of the remnants. So actually, the very first contact that I had with some remnants of European Jewry was Rosh Hashanah 1944.
And what was that encounter like?
Well, that was very brief, and just there are a handful of people. But the major group. Then when I returned, I went back to Naples. Then I returned to serve in Dijon.
Yeah,
in Dijon, I was there from for about 4 months in Dijon in February 1945 to May, and then from there I was transferred to Marseille. And Marseille, that's when we encountered quite a considerable number. And I think in my book I mentioned that there was a group of some 300 who came from Buchenwald specifically. There was Ali Abed base outside near Toulon. We processed some, of course, the legal immigrants who came to Marseille.
How did you do that? In terms, what do you mean process?
Well, I don't mean we helped to process. We went to the base, and I'm referring to we, not we, but the American Army.
But how did you, as a chaplain, function at that time? In other words, was there anything in particularly important as a chaplain?
Well, I served in a certain. I came 2 or 3 times a week to that base where they were stationed and spoke to them. At that time, we were receiving lists of people. First of all, we collected the list. We were getting letters from America asking us, "Have you seen anybody?" So it was a two-way,
So people were sending you letters specifically.
Have you seen anybody
in Marseille?
In Marseille.
And then you.
In other words, they pray. What happened is, of course, there's communication between the chaplains in Germany and the chaplains in France. As a matter of fact, I don't know why I don't have that list. I guess I turned it in. But the chaplains would send us lists, and so we exchanged lists of people.
Who were you working with? Which chaplains? Do you remember writing to and corresponding?
Let's see, who was was the main one? It was a Schechter.
Herschel Schachter.
Herschel Schachter was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And
He was
my neighbor too, from Yonkers, Abe Klausner. Klausner, well, I think was the spearhead. I think Klausner was the one who sent us the list.
Right.
You know, it's hard to recall. I think it was Klausner.
Yeah. Right.
Oh,
He was the one who established the Sherita
That's
Blake
right,
volumes. So in essence, what you did was collect these lists and try to convey some of the messages that you would receive from the
we
States.
served as a conduit, you know.
I see.
Well, both from Germany and from the States and so on, and ask the people, do you have any relatives and so on. And once in a while, you know, we'd come across a name.
So you spent 3 days out of a week, you would say, there?
Well, not full days, but yeah, I'd say 3 days a week we were there, yeah. And then, of course, sometimes, somehow they managed to get in. Some of them were leaders. There's one particular Rabbi Bialystov whom I mentioned in my book, whom I spoke to at considerable length.
Mm-hmm. And this is in Marseille?
Yeah. But we really only functioned through are we talking, there are two different things now that are not even too clear in my own mind. There's one was the one that we did at Marseille. At just outside Marseille.
Yeah.
The legitimate one.
Yes.
And the Aliyah Bet was the illegitimate
yeah,
one.
Right. Well,
yes.
What I wanted
You're
to
not
do
talking about the legitimate one.
I want to talk about the legitimate, and then
Yeah.
I'll go to the other.
Yes. But that generally, we served as a conduit. And then people come with problems, you know.
Mm-hmm. Any specifics that only you as a chaplain could deal with?
Well, as a matter of kashrut, the Buchenwald group, as I mentioned in the book, were very, very orthodox. For example, I think I mentioned that they didn't want to have anything to do with the nurses. The women would come in and they wanted to stay away from the women. I think I mentioned one scene where one of the kids had a Torah, a 17, 18-year-old boy, and when a girl came near him, he put the Torah between him and the nurse, you know. So, yeah. And well, that was general. What they were saying is that in Buchenwald we kept kosher, we kept Shabbat as much as possible, or Shabbos, and we weren't going to make any compromises. You know, anything that was any problems that sort, religious problems. But not only religious problems, you know. Sometimes it's communication. Oh yeah, that was another thing. We were aware of the fact that in southern France, now, you know, things are a little hazy in my mind now, but in southern France, a number of kids had been placed in homes, in French homes, and there's a big problem of conversion. How to salvage kids who were,
Did you get them back, or how did that work?
Well, you know, we established some communication. You know, I wasn't able to implement the thing all the way, but I started it. You know, in other words, we wrote to Beidich in Paris and so on, and said here that we understand that this and this place had some children and so on. It was mostly in the around Nice and Cannes, you know, in the Côte d'Azur, the lower Alps, I think it's called. That's pretty much what we did. More of a conduit. I think we did more with the illegal immigrants. But what about food? Did you have to get food for them? Did you? No, that the Army provided. I mean, that was the Americans provided the food. Oh, you mean as far as kashrut?
Well, DPs. Well, for the DPs.
Yeah. Well, also we worked with Chaplain Seltzer, Rabbi Seltzer, you know, the rabbi of Marseille, who had just, as my book indicates, had just been. He was alive. They didn't know he was alive. He was a chaplain with the FFE. Formerly, he wore the uniform of a chaplain, the FFE on it, very, very formal. Looked like an officer, although it was, you know, an informal army and so on. So we did a lot with him too. I'll give you an illustration. The things that he wanted to do, he couldn't do. For example, long distance, which is very, very difficult. To call Paris, it took him 4 days to call Paris. He would come and sit in my office, and he'd pick up the phone and reach whoever it was, the rabbi in Paris, or the office in Consistoire. He would reach them through my phone, and that only took 2 or 3 hours. I remember seeing him quite often sitting there waiting for my phone call. Even my phone call took 4 hours. Yeah. But, you know, in other words, he used military communications. So to Paris.
You provided that for basically the Jewish community in which you were working.
Yes,
the rabbis.
yes, but some of it may have had to do with remnants, communication with, do you know so-and-so here? He was in Buchenwald, his brother's here, his mother's there, and so on.
So between letters and phone calls, providing a phone, that was an important aspect of...
That's right.
Now, you mentioned the illegal activity that you were involved in, and could we go into some detail on that?
Well, there's a problem. If you illegal residents were not entitled to ration book. They all had a ration card.
Mm-hmm. And excuse me, 1 second. Again, we must be very specific if we can on the period that we're talking about. What dates are we talking about?
We're now talking about the summer of 45.
Summer of 45, okay.
Yeah, in other words, between VE Day and VJ Day.
Okay.
Primarily.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fine. And what took place?
Well, as I say, the basic problem was food. Food. Here we operated almost exclusively, almost as shlichim of, I call him operated Zion. His name is Zev, I think. We didn't know his last name, Zev. Zev was the official of, he had been sent there. Apparently he wasn't attached to any military establishment. He'd been sent there by Haganah. Mm-hmm. And he came to my office and said, invited me, as a matter of fact, I didn't say anything in the office. He invited me to his apartment. And perhaps another chap from Hasselkorn may have been there at the time. I think the two of us were there. Once in a while we had another chaplain, Rabbi Bonin, because Marseille was a takeoff spot, a transfer spot for people ostensibly on their way to Japan. 42nd Division, Rabbi Bonin, that would be a classmate of mine. My best man at my wedding, so we were very close. He was there. So he may have been for 2 or 3 weeks involved in it, but fundamentally I think the chaplain Hasselkorn, myself. And then, actually, there's an American soldier whom I mentioned in my book called Shimon Collar, C-A-L-L-E-R. There's a little bit about him in my book. Shimon Collar came from Far Giladi. Mm-hmm. His mother was there. I think he had no father. And he had come to America and gotten into the army. He was a sergeant. And he worked with Zev. In other words, when Zev wanted something, he called Shimon. Shimon called me, and that's how we operated. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Shimon and I, when we went out to the Aliyah Bet camp, which
where was that?
was near Toulon.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember the place. I don't think it was in the town. Outside of Toulon. I'd say 35 miles away. We went 50 kilometers from Marseille. Mm-hmm. It was near the naval base, the French naval base. And the desperate problem was food there. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this in my book. Mm-hmm. Very interesting thing that happened. We had a senior chaplain, who's a marvelous human being, whom I portrayed in my book, Patrick Fay, Monsignor Fay, who's now Monsignor Fay. I mentioned him in my book in another connection, not in this connection. So we didn't call him colonel. He was a colonel, but we just call him Pat.
Rabbi Dembowitz, not Dembowitz, excuse me, Rabbi Breslau knows him.
Yeah, yes. Well, Pat and I still continue a relationship. He's been here. He lives in Riverdale. So. All right. Now, Pat was very much, he was the kind of person who, when you needed a tent for the minyan, he'd say, look, you use anybody for a minyan, so he came. In other words, he identified very much with the Jewish community. He had landed in North Africa long before, right at the beginning of North Africa. It's important for this story, as you'll see. Now, when he came to North Africa, the Catholic nurses came to him there in Oran, this was, and pleaded with him that they didn't have enough food. So he played a little hanky-panky, and he'd get some food, usually surplus, because they're moving out of Oran, In other words, he didn't feel he was depriving the forces, but he didn't care that much. In other words, his attitude was, look, these French orphans need it, the Algerian orphans need it, Catholic orphans need it as much as our men do. So he brought in supplies. In other words, he was already trained to chop from the quartermasters. He knew the procedures, you see, how you do. In the army, the important thing is to fill out form and triplicate, see, and so, And so there's a beautiful story, which I don't know if I told you, but it's a marvelous story. We needed flour. They had no flour. They had no bread, and that was a problem too. They wanted to make their own bread, and some they didn't want to eat the army bread, which had lard in it. So they needed flour. So I went with him to the quartermaster's, and I can't imagine I put it in because this is really a little bit illegitimate. We go in. He fills out a form for 2,000 pounds of flour. In other words, 20 sacks. And it says for use. The bottom line says what for, and he says wafers for mass. See? Now wafers are paper thin. For a ton of flour, you can make enough wafers for all of Europe, for a generation. They can put it in. Quartermaster basically garnished. He just gives it to him. And the ironic thing is this: he loads up his jeep. This is for me. He loads up his jeep. We had a driver. The colonel wouldn't drive himself. We had a driver, and three of us were in the jeep. And he didn't want his driver to lift anything, so he called over the. Yeah.
No, we were.
Right,
he was in the jeep.
All right. Yeah. So he turned to the quartermaster. The quartermaster apparently knew him, and the sergeant knew him, and he ordered the Nazi prisoners to load the jeep. So it was very interesting that here I watched Nazis picking up 2,000 planes, and they were complaining, because of everything, and they were loading them in the back of the chaplain's jeep,
For Jews.
For illegal Jewish immigrants. I thought those are kind of interesting touches. Well, then the question is, how do you get through the gate? Somehow the fellow at the gate might still be a little suspicious about.
Even the chaplains are suspicious.
No, wait a second. The driver, the driver going through, he would hand him the paper. The VE Day had intervened. In other words, they had no longer had any use for the flour. The big question was it worthwhile to take the flour from France and ship it to the Pacific? Because we thought that the big war, the invasion of Japan, that was the big problem, quartermaster problem. But, nobody knew about the atomic bomb. This is just 2 weeks before the atomic bomb. But there's a big question in their mind whether that stuff would ever leave France anyhow. So, in other words, he had no uneasy conscience about it. He wasn't taking anything from the food from the soldiers. So, what he did is he said to the sergeant, his assistant, walk out the gate. He says, I'll take the wheel. And they see the colonel, he's at the jeep wheel, which is very unusual. And so, as soon as they saw that, they didn't even look. He didn't have to show any papers. He just went, wait, I think he took more than, that was it, yeah. What you're supposed to do is look at the manifest and then count it, and that sort of thing. But he said, hey, how about this, how about that? In addition to the 2,000 pounds, he said, how about a sack of this, how about that, So he did a little bit of finagling as well. In other words, it wasn't only the 2,000 pounds. That was the point. I couldn't remember why, after all, he had the manifest, it didn't make any difference. Are you recording this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so it was an interesting Catholic priest who'd already learned the lesson, from North Africa of, to him it was not that much. And of course he was interested in Jews, and he was interested in, he knew about it. He was involved in the underground, so to speak.
He was involved
in that sense,
yeah,
he was involving himself in something because he knew it was not going to the Marseille one, it was going to the Liabet one. So, but he played along with it, without any difficulty. Yeah, on our way out, we said, we could spend the rest of our lives in jail just for what we're doing now.
Oh, you went along with it? Yeah.
Oh, yes, I was there. I watched the whole procedure, yeah.
So you got this...
And as a matter of fact, I'd see something here, I said, hey, how about this rice or something like that? In other words, we took quite a lot of stuff, they took care of it.
Then you took this to the camp.
Incidentally, there's a girl by the name of Sylvia Newlander who seemed to have something to do with it. We also seem to be going back to the earlier part. You're asking us with whom we're in communication. Yeah. As I recall, Sylvia Newlander also had something.
Yeah, I'm going to talk to her.
And then, of course, we're in contact with the JDC people.
And who in particular?
I had the man's name whom I worked with there. I can't recall offhand. I think he later took over. He became the head of the European office.
Schwartz?
No, not Schwartz, no. The European office. I have his name somewhere in my notes. Yeah. If I have a chance to recall it now.
Okay. Now, was there anything else you did with Ali Abed? Did they call upon you for anything else aside from getting them food?
Well, the chapter in my book in which I described somebody, that was myself.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't indicate what it was. Of course, I was in virtual daily contact with Zev. And then...
to this day, you don't know who Zev is?
No.
Mm-hmm.
I once heard a name and so on. I was involved quite a bit, I got to know Major Tobiansky, and he was executed. So that was a terrible thing.
Do you want to tell that story?
No. Well, I don't know. You know Major. He was a man who invited me to speak, and this was Naples, yeah. No. It was, to me, it was inconceivable that he would be involved in anything as a tall trader. I mean, that was so outrageous, but apparently it's not only my opinion. I think the Israelis now agree to it. But going back to this thing, one day I told Shimon Collar that I was arranging. Oh, wait a second, it's more than that. The war ended. Wait a second. No. The war hadn't ended. The European war ended, and a lot of flyers and planes were sent to a place near the Aliyah, the regular ones, very near. They're located there. And I got to talking to them, I served them, and discovered that they were grounded. When they were grounded, it meant that they didn't draw double pay. Flying, you get flying pay, it's called.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that. Flying pay. See. To them, it was a terrible thing not to have flying pay. So what they would do is they would find all kinds of occasions. They'd ask me, you need to go to Paris for something. Did I go? I think once, if I'm not mistaken. I went to Paris to see the chaplain there on some mission or something. Some excuse. But at all events, what they were doing is called R&R. They take men on rest and recreation, and they take them to. This was in Marseille. They take them to Naples because these men hadn't been there or something. They take them to Capri and so on for rest and recreation. And sometimes they just take a tour of Europe or something like that. They were permitted to do that. It was really just an army device to give these guys flying pay.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't recall who it was, whether Shimon mentioned it. Shimon said, how about a trip to Palestine? Somebody, one of us, talked him on it. I said, that was terrific. So I went to the people in charge, the Air Force people, and arranged to take, I think it was 31 Jewish flyers and 2 Catholic priests, of whom Pat, I think, yes, Pat was one of them, Pat and one of the priests. And so we had 34 of us on board. It was a B-17 bomber. It's mentioned, that part's mentioned in the book. Now, what happened is, the night before we left at 5 in the morning, I met with Zev, and Zev said to me, look, I want you to deliver something to Haganah headquarters in Tel Aviv. Something I thought was a package like this, He delivers to my, I think either Shimon or he, I guess Shimon, delivered to my apartment 2 suitcases, not this kind of suitcase, the big, heavy, big, I couldn't lift it myself, 2 heavy suitcases. It had radio equipment in it. Now, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Shimon got that. Again, I imagine. Shimon, we had Jews in the Signal Corps who knew about Aliyah Bed and so on, and they had a list, see, a shopping list of what they needed, parts, radio parts, because that was their field, And if I'm not mistaken, Shimon gave them the shopping list to these guys, to these Jewish fellows, who attended. He knew them because he used to help me in services too. And so he knew these fellows, see. I remember I needed a Jeep, see, and I went there. That was another story. It's a stupid story. There's nothing. My Jeep was stolen while I was on leave, and I needed another one. So, and that might take a long time to get. So, you go to Sergeant Cohn or Sergeant Finkelstein, one of your Febbermen whom you knew, he expedited. It was nothing illegal, but instead of taking 2 months, 2 months you'd be gone already. You know? I'd get it, you know, within a week or so, something like that. He just put you at the top of the list, you know. Well, it was because...
Protects you.
Protects you, yeah. Well, you learn that. I didn't learn that until 3 months before I got out of the army. All right. So we had the list, and it was suitcases. And the suitcases were to be delivered to some, I can't recall who it was, a deceased poet. I know he wasn't a Jew, you know, not Israeli, a Jew. And I knew that he'd already been gone, but it had his address in Tel Aviv, you know.
You knew he was already dead?
I knew he was dead. I can't recall who it was, but it was a poet, a writer.
Bialik?
It was not a, you know, if it were Bialik, I remember. It might be Aleph Dalet Gordon, it might be some, you know, it might be somebody, a real deceased guy. I mean, it was not recently deceased, you know. But it had his address, you know, 25 Rehov Acharam or whatever it was, you know, something like that, you know. So, but I was told that I was to deliver to the Mechabe H, to the fire. Yeah. To go down, they told me the street where go into to speak to the Jewish, it was all Jewish fire department in Tel Aviv, you know. I was to ask for Chaim or something, I can't recall the name. It was also like Zev, it was just the first name, you know. I asked for Chaim, and I think it's mentioned, you know, that part may be detailed. So, of course, the beauty of it was that on the B-17, we didn't go through customs. We landed in Greece, and we loaded 1,400 to 1,100 gallons of high-octane fuel or whatever, you know, it's kind of used for planes back then. I thought, my God, how much fuel we're using just for this Haganah trip, you know. The men did not know. The flyers didn't know.
The Jewish flyers didn't know?
Didn't know anything about it, no.
So you were taking in airplane fuel as well as...
No. I was saying, we went there, I just had the, you know, the feeling that there was no question of energy crisis, but the cost of it, you know. At $1 a gallon, we were just fueling up here. He gets off and says, put in 1,100 gallons of gas. Just had a funny feeling about it. Well, at all events, then when we landed in Greece, that was our stop. You know, there were no questions asked. And then we flew over Egypt, and we came just out of our way. We went through Sinai. I mentioned that in my book. We pretended we were Moses, and we went away out of our way, you know, the roundabout, just to see what the Sinai looked like. And then we landed in Tel Aviv, and you report the military, British military, and no questions asked. You know, what's this? And this is a chaplain's baggage, and so on, and that's it.
And that was it. They didn't bother you.
No customs. See, that was the whole thing. That's why Haganah used it. See, and as a matter of fact, there are a number of interesting things. I cannot recall whether we did this, you know, but they asked me if I would take on board. We may have done it. Possibly we may have done it. The Haganah people, I'll come to it. Remind me about these, you know, about the men back.
The what?
Taking an extra 2 passengers back. I think we did.
Yeah. So.
We landed.
Yeah.
I took this stuff, you know, I got somebody to schlep it, and I couldn't take it in, but we got into a taxi and went over there. When I went there, I said to them, I delivered it, and I said, regards from Shimon Collar, whom they knew. So apparently Shimon was, you know, almost a contact person. He was really working he wore 2 hats, a double agent. He was really a Haganah man in the Army of the United States.
He was in the United States Army?
United States Army, Sergeant United States Army.
Do you know where I might be able to locate him today?
Yeah, I think in Fargiladi. Yeah. Shimon Collar would know a great deal of it. I don't know if it's Collar or Collar, I don't know. He spelled it C-A-L-L-E-R, but I imagine it's Collar, you know, Collar meaning Well, the interesting thing about it is, I said to him, you know, I promised, I knew, you remember when I told you about how hard it was to call Paris, and I imagined in Israel, you know, in Palestine, you know, even under best of circumstances, 1936, you couldn't make a call. In those days, the first time I was in Palestine, you couldn't make a call long distance. It was, you know...
It hasn't improved that much.
Dial everything now. There are problems, still. But there, you know, the car from Tel Aviv to Kfar Giladi, I figured out if it took me 4 hours for me, military, to call Paris, and it took Rabbi Salzer 4 days to call on a regular French line. Could imagine how long it took. I said, I told Shimon, I said, it's ridiculous. I'll never reach your mother. I said, what's her phone? I said, oh, she has no phone. She has no phone, you know. So this fella, whoever it was, Chaim or whatever the guy's name is, he said, you want to call? He says, come with me. I don't mind whether I waited till he finished his duty. And we went to his apartment. We go in his apartment, go into his bedroom, and there's a phone there. And he says, wait a minute. And he calls, he picks up the phone. And I would say, not much longer than it now takes. Well, as long as it took in those days to call from New York to Philadelphia, that's how long it took. You know, before the days of that. It took maybe 2 minutes. And he had her on the phone. Apparently Haganah had it